Good evening, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes, and this has been a minute. It's been a little while since we last read a book. We finished off The Three Musketeers, and then I went to our local Christmas parade, on which I was actually on a float with a lot of other folks, and it was a very cold night. I already had a little bit of sore throat, so I was chewing gum to try to soothe my throat. But the next day, which was a Sunday, I came down with a horrible cold, which I have had now for 9 days. I am starting to turn the corner, but not quite there yet. But I didn't want to let any more time go by without starting a new book. So we will start a new book tonight, and we will see how far I can go before my voice becomes unlistenable or before I just can't read anymore. I do have some hot decaf coffee here to help me through. So tonight's book occurs in England around the holiday Christmas time on a snowy night aboard a train. The name of the book is The Mystery in White by J. Jefferson Ferran. Chapter 1. The Snowbound Train. The great snow began on the evening of December 19th. Shoppers smiled as they hurried home, speculating on the chances of a white Christmas. Their hopes were dampened when they turned on their wireless to learn from the smooth, impersonal voice of the BBC announcer that an anticyclone was callously wending its way from the northwest of Ireland, and on to the 20th the warmth arrived, turning the snow to drizzle and the thin white crust to muddy brown. Not this year, sighed the disappointed sentimentalists as they slipped sadly through the slush. But on the 21st, the snow returned, this time in earnest. Brown became white again. The sounds of traffic were deadened. Wheel marks, foot marks, all marks were blotted out as soon as they were made. The sentimentalists rejoiced. It snowed all day and all night. On the 22nd, it was still snowing. Snowballs flew, snowmen grew, skeptical children regained their belief in fairyland, and sour adults felt like Santa Claus, buying more presents than they had ever intended. In the evening, the voice of an announcer, traveling through endless white ether, informed the millions that more snow was coming. The anticyclone from the northwest of Ireland had got lost in it. More snow came. It floated down from its limitless source like a vast extinguisher. Sweepers, eager for their harvest, waited in vain for the snow to stop. People wondered whether it would ever stop. It grew beyond the boundaries of local interest. By the 23rd, it was news. By the 24th, it was a nuisance. Practical folk cursed it. Even the sentimentalists wondered how they were going to carry out their programs. Traffic was dislocated. Cars and motor coaches lost themselves. Railway gangs fought snowdrifts. The thought of the thaw, with its stupendous task of conversion, became increasingly alarming. The elderly who formed one half of a dozen inmates of a third-class compartment on the 1137 from Euston, refused to be alarmed. In fact, although the train had come to an unofficial halt that appeared to be permanent, he pooh-poohed the whole thing as insignificant, with the irritating superiority of a world traveler. "If you want to know what the snow's really like," he remarked to the young lady next to him, "you ought to try the Yukon." "Ought I?" murmured the young lady obediently. She was a chorus girl, and her own globe-trotting had been limited to the provincial towns. Her present destination was Manchester, which in this weather seemed quite far enough. I remember once in Dawson City, we had a month of snow, the Boer went on, while the young man on his other side thought, my God, is he starting off again? It was in 99, no, 98, well, one or the other. I was a kid at the time. We got sick of the damn stuff. Well, I'm sick of the damn stuff, answered the chorus girl, twisting her head toward the window. All she saw was a curtain of white flakes. How much longer are we going to wait here? Does anybody think? We must have stopped an hour. 34 minutes, corrected the tall, pale youth opposite, with a glance at his wristwatch. He did not have spots, but looked as though he ought to have had. His unhealthy complexion was due partly to the atmosphere of the basement office in which he worked, and partly to a rising temperature. He ought to have been in bed. Thank you, smiled the chorus girl. I see one's got to be careful when you're around. The clerk smiled faintly. He was impressed by the chorus girl's beauty, a real die-hard platinum blonde, marvelous person to take out for supper. If one had the courage for that sort of thing. He believed the Boer, that is, the old man, would have had the courage and had noted the man's quick little half-sly glances between the egotistical statements. He even believed the chorus girl might accept an invitation. There was something vulnerable about her, which her assurance attempted to cloak, but the clerk was even more impressed. Excuse me. Was even more impressed by the other young lady in the compartment, the one who was sitting on the other side of the old man. To take her out to supper would provide more than a momentary thrill. It would entirely upset one's work. She was dark. She had a tall, supple figure. The chorus girl was rather small. He felt sure she played a good game of tennis, swam, and rowed. He visualized her cantering over the moors and sailing over 5 barred gates, with her brother trying vainly to catch her up. Her brother was sitting in the corner opposite her. You knew it was her brother from the conversation, and you could also see it from their resemblance. They called each other David and Lydia. Lydia was the next to speak. This is getting to the limit, she exclaimed. Her voice had a low, rich quality. What about interviewing the guard again and asking if there's any hope of moving before next June? I asked him 10 minutes ago, said the old man. I won't repeat what he said. Not necessarily, yawned David. We have imaginations. Yes, and it seems we need our imaginations tonight, chimed the chorus girl. I'll have to imagine I'm in Manchester. Will you? We shall have to imagine we are at Christmas in a house party, smiled Lydia, sleeping on a downy bed. By the way, if we're in for an all-night session, I hope the railway company will supply hot water bottles. Suddenly, she caught the clerk's eye. She surprised the admiration in it, and was kind. What will you have to imagine? She asked. The catastrophe of the snowdrift and the camaraderie of Christmas were losing tongues. The old man alone had needed no encouragement. The clerk colored, though his cheeks were already flushed with fever. An aunt, he jerked. If she's like mine, she's the best left to the imagination, laughed Lydia. But then she probably isn't. The clerk's aunt was not like Lydia's aunt. She was even more trying, but her dutiful nephew visited her periodically, partly for the sake of his financial future, and partly because he had a secret weakness for lonely people. A little silence fell upon the party. The only one who thought it mattered was the chorus girl. A nervous restlessness possessed her soul, and she declared afterwards that she was sure she had been the first to move unconsciously into the shadow of coming events, Because goodness, I was all on edge, she said. And why should I have been? I mean, nothing had happened yet. And so far, the old man in the corner hadn't opened his mouth. I don't believe he'd even opened his eyes. He might have been dead. And then, don't forget, he was right opposite me. And they say I'm a psychic. But her vague anticipations were not centered solely in the old man in the corner. She, too, had noticed the quick little half-sly glances of the elderly old man, who was a bore, as she believed, and she knew was not too elderly to think about her in a certain way. She had also noticed that the clerk's eyes upon her legs, and rather studious avoidance of any vulgar interest on the part of the other young man. If Jessie Noyes was very conscious of her physical attractions, she claimed it was her business to be. She was well aware of both her power and the limitation of her power, and while the power, despite its small thrills, gave her a secret dread, the limitation was a secret sorrow. How wonderful to be able to conquer a man wholly and eternally, instead of being just an ephemeral taste. Still, she was not bitter. She was anxious and nervous and warm. Life was life. Driven now by her restlessness, and finding the silence unendurable, she broke it by suddenly exclaiming, "Well, let's go on. That's only 4 of us. What will you have to imagine?" The question was addressed, not too wisely, to the boring old man. "Me? Imagine," he answered. "I don't know. It's my habit to imagine. Take things as they come, good, bad, or indifferent. That's my motto. You learn when you've been knocked around, or have knocked around as much as I have." "Perhaps I can be more interesting," said the old man in the corner, opening his eyes suddenly. He was neither dead nor asleep. As a matter of fact, he had heard every word that had been uttered since the train had steamed out of Euston at 11:37, and the probability of this made more than one of the 5 people who now turned to him feel a little uncanny. Not that he had heard anything he should not have heard, but a man who listens with his eyes closed, and whose eyes themselves become so peculiarly alive when they are opened. These eyes were like little lamps illuminating things invisible to others, and is not the best tonic for frayed nerves. "Please do, sir," answered David, after a short pause, "and invent a really good story for us. Ours have been most definitely dull." "Oh, mine is interesting without any invention," replied the old man, "and also, incidentally, rather appropriate to our current season. I am on my way to interview King Charles I." "Really? With head or without?" inquired David politely. "With, I trust," the old man responded. "I'm informed he is quite complete. We are to meet in an old house at Naseby. Frankly, I am not very confident that the interview will occur. Charles I may be bashful, or he may turn out to be just some ordinary cavalier hiding from Cromwell and Fairfax. After 300 years, identity becomes a trifle confused." He smiled with a cynical humor. "Or again, he may be non est, simply the imagination of certain nervous people who think they have seen him about. But of course," he added, after pursuing his thin lips, "there is some possibility that he really is about. Yes, if that over-maligned and over-glorified monarch did visit the house on the day of his defeat, and if the house walls have stored up any emotional incidents that I can set free, we may add an interesting page to our history." "Don't think me rude," exclaimed Lydia, "but do you really and truly believe in that sort of thing?" "Exactly what do you mean by that sort of thing?" asked the old man. His tone was disapproving. The elderly bore, another man that is, the boring man, took up the battle. "Spooks and ghosts?" he claimed. "Poor pooh, I say. Stuff and nonsense. I've seen the Indian rope trick, yes, and exploded it, in Rangoon, 23. "Spooks and ghosts," repeated the old man, his disapproval now diverted to the boar. The guard's voice sounded from the corridor in the distance. Though faint, the source of that was solid enough. Terms are deceptive. The only true language has no words, which explains, sir, why some people who speak too many words have no understanding." "Eh?" "Now, if by your expression spooks and ghosts, you imply conscious emanations, aftermaths of physical existence, capable of independent functioning, of a semi-earthly character, well, then, I probably do not believe in that sort of thing. There are others, of course, whose opinions I respect, who disagree with me. They consider that you, sir, are doomed to exist perpetually in some form or other. That is, perhaps, a depressing thought. But if by spooks and ghosts you imply emanations recreated by acute living sensitiveness or intelligence from the inexhaustible storehouses of the past, then I do believe in that sort of thing, inevitably." The elderly boor was temporarily crushed. So was the chorus girl. But the brother and sister, anxious to be au fait with every phrase of progressive thought, if only to discard it, and equipped with sufficient fortitude to withstand its shocks, were intrigued. "Reduced to words of not more than 2 syllables," said David. "You mean we can conjure up the past?" "Conjure up is not a happy term," answered the old man. "It suggests magic, and there is nothing magical in the process. We can reveal, expose the past. The past is irreducible." "Bosh!" exclaimed the boor. He did not like being crushed. The old man who had crushed him bent forward to repeat the operation. "What is a simple gramophone record but a record of the past?" he demanded, tapping the boor on the knee. "Caruso is dead, but we can hear his voice today. This is not due to invention, but to discovery, and if the discovery had occurred 300 years ago, I should not have to travel to Naseby to hear Charles I's voice, if that is, I am to hear it. But nature does not wait upon our discoveries. That is a thing so many ignoramuses forget. Her sound waves, light waves, thought waves, emotional waves, to mention a few of those which come within the limited range of our particular senses and perceptions, all travel ceaselessly, some without interruption, some to find temporary prisons in some obstructions where they embed themselves. Here they may diminish into negligible influences, or, mark this, they may be freed again. The captured waves, of course, are merely a fragment from the original source. Potentially everything that has ever existed, everything born of the senses, can be recovered by the senses. Fortunately, sir, there will be no gramophone record of your recent expletive. Nevertheless, in addition to the mere mark on memory, your bosh will go on forever. The boar, rather surprisingly, put up a fight, though it was something in the nature of a death struggle. Then here is another Boche to keep it company, he snapped. You need never fear for the loneliness of your words, replied the old man. And what about your words? They will go on too, but it is unlikely that any future generation will recapture our present conversation. In spite of our obvious distaste for each other, our emotions are hardly virile enough. They soon will fade, even from our own memories. But suppose, yes, sir, suppose they suddenly grow explosive. Suppose you leap upon me with a knife, plunging it into the heart of Mr. Edward Maltby of the Royal Psychological Society. Then indeed some future person sitting in the corner may become uncomfortably aware of a very unpleasant emotion. He closed his eyes again, but his 5 traveling companions all received the impression that he was still seeing them through his lids. The solid guard, passing along the corridor at the moment, was turned to with relief, although he had no comfort to offer. I'm afraid I can't say anything, he replied to the inquiries, repeating a formula of which he was weary. We're doing all we can, but with the line blocked before and behind us, well, there it is, the train is stuck. I call it disgraceful, muttered the boar. Where's the damn breakdown gang, or whatever they call themselves? We're trying to get assistance. We can't do more, retorted the guard. How long do you expect we'll be stuck here? I'd like to know that myself, sir. All night? Asked Lydia. Maybe, miss. Can one walk along the line? Only for a bit. It's worse beyond. Oh dear, muttered the chorus girl. I must get to Manchester. I asked because I was wondering whether there was another line or a station near, said Lydia. Well, there's Himsby, answered the guard. That's a bench line that joins this at Swayton, but I wouldn't care to try it. Excuse me, not in this weather. It's this weather that gives us incentive, David pointed out. How far is Himsby? I shouldn't care to say, but, well, 5 or 6 miles, perhaps. Which way? The guard pointed out the corridor of the window. Yes, but we couldn't carry our trunks, said Lydia. What would happen to them? The guard gave a little shrug. Madness was not his concern, and he came across plenty. They would go on to their destination, he replied, but I couldn't say when they'd turn up. According to you, smiled David, they'd turn up before we would. Well, there you are, said the guard. Then he continued on his way, dead sick of it. There was a little silence. Lydia turned her head from the corridor and stared out the window next to her. Almost stopped, she announced. Well, people, what about it? Almost is not quite, answered her brother cautiously. A second little silence followed. Jessie Noyes gazed at the tip of her shoe, fearful to commit herself. The flushed clerk seemed in the same condition. The boar's expression, on the other hand, was definitely unfavorable. Asking for trouble, he declared, when no one else spoke. If none of you have been lost in a snowstorm, I have. Ah, but that was in Dawson City, murmured David, where snow is snow. Then a startling thing happened. The old man in the corner suddenly opened his eyes and sat upright. He stared straight ahead of him, but Jessie, who was in his line of vision, was convinced that he was not seeing her. A moment later he swerved around towards the corridor. Beyond the corridor window, something moved, a dim white smudge that faded out into the all-embracing snow as they all watched it. The other line, yes, yes. Quite a good idea, said the old man. A Merry Christmas to you all. He seized his bag from the rack, leapt across the corridor, jumped from the train, and a few seconds he too had faded out. "There goes a lunatic," commented the elderly Boar, "if there ever was one." Chapter 2. The Invincible Track. "Well, what do you all make of it?" inquired David after a pause. "I've already given you my opinion," responded the Boar, and repeated it by tapping his forehead. "Yes, but I'm afraid I daren't agree with the opinion. In case others follow the alleged lunatic's example," answered David. "You'll remember we were just discussing what he has now done." "Only we wouldn't do it quite so violently," interposed Lydia. "I almost thought for a moment that he'd spotted Charles I." She spoke lightly, but she was watching to see how the others took her remark. "Charles the fiddlesticks," muttered the Boar. "Didn't Nero use fiddlesticks?" said David. "Anyhow, somebody was outside there before he had hopped onto the line. So, even if the going isn't good, it can't be impossible." He turned to Jessie Noyes. "How do you feel about it?" Jessie looked out the window. The snow had ceased falling, and the motionless white scene was like a film that had suddenly stopped. "I don't know," she replied. I can't think of what'll happen if we don't get to Manchester." "It's important, is it?" "Oh, yes." David glanced at his sister, and she nodded. "We'll go if you go," he said. "But you mustn't go for me," exclaimed Jessie quickly. "It would only partly be for you," explained Lydia. "I really think we'd be using you as an excuse. You see, we want those nice downy beds. And then," she added half hesitatingly, "there's another thing. It least occurred to me." "What?" asked David. "I dare say it's quite ridiculous," she answered. "But somehow or other, I can't help feeling just a bit worried about that Mr. What was it? Maltby?" "Edward Maltby, of the Royal Psychological Society," nodded David. "He was such an old man. What did we feel like if we read in tomorrow's papers that he'd been found buried in the snow?" "Tomorrow's Christmas, and there won't be any papers," her brother pointed out. "That doesn't reduce his chance of being buried in the snow, my darling," Lydia retorted. Jessie chimed in, now seeking her own excuse. "Yes, one does almost feel as if one almost ought to go after him, doesn't one?" "This one doesn't," replied the Boar, unconsciously adding a point in favor of departure. Jessie's real excuse was that on the morrow, a theatrical manager would have left Manchester, taking the chance of an engagement with him, and the possibility of missing both was emphasized by the voice of the guard when he returned along the corridor, answering questions that were flung on him as he went. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't say." "No, madam, nothing yet." "Yes, sir, it may be all night." "Oh, let's," cried Lydia. I'll join you if I might," added the clerk with a stammering boldness. "Make up a party, you know." The tide of adventure was flowing fast. Lydia was already on her feet, bringing down her small suitcase. Had she known the suitcase destination, she would have hesitated. Only the elderly Boar frowned. "You're not really going, are you?" he asked the chorus girl. "Why not, if they are?" she replied. "Well, you take my advice and stay here with me." With the blindness of egotism, he was quite unconscious that his remark settled the matter. Glad to be rid of his company, and armed with their small luggage, the four adventurers lowered themselves to the thick carpet of snow. Then David reached up and banged the door to the corridor, which was fast filling with interested spectators, and the journey through the strange fairyland began. It began with disarming ease. Had difficulties arisen at once, they might have returned, although pride would have rebelled against retreat at this early stage, and the vision of the Boar's triumphant expression with another deferent factor. Following Mr. Maltby's deep footprints in the few yards along the track, they came to a path bearing from the line into a white distance. The line of the path was almost obliterated, but they identified it by a fence and a signpost. Footpath to Himmersby. This was evidently a point at which, in normal times, pedestrians crossed the railway. The fence soon came to an end. The path lost its identifying boundary, and presumably continued diagonally across a field. Maltby's footprints and something that looked like a road beyond in a distant hedge maintained the party's hope. But when they reached the thing that looked like a road, to find it to be lied in its appearance, hope grew a little less. I suppose we're right, queried Jessie. We must be, replied David cheerfully. Follow the footprints. The footprints mightn't be right, said the clerk. What depressing logic, exclaimed David. By the way, I suppose you've all noticed that we're following more than one set. Yes, so the other man couldn't have been Charles I, added Lydia, because ghosts don't have footprints. Come on, I want to get somewhere. They continued on their uncertain way. While crossing a second field, the snow began again. Each of the four travelers wondered whether to suggest going back, and each lacked the moral courage to put the wonder into words. The second field sloped down into a small valley. Suddenly, David gave a shout. He had plowed a little way ahead. The road, people, the road, he called. They overtook him to find staring disconsolately at a long, narrow ditch, camouflaged by the snow. It had continued the story of deception. When you or I are all alone, David, said Lydia, I'll tell you what I think of you. Which way now? Asked Jessie, struggling against panic. They stared around. The increasing snow had almost obliterated the marks of their predecessors. Just beyond the ditch, they were being rapidly wiped out. What about back? Proposed David, voicing sense at last. They turned. The slope they had descended was scarcely visible through the curtain of whirling white, and while they stood hesitatingly, their own footprints became lost in the new covering. Yes, back, cried Lydia. That beastly boar was right. She began running. A voice hailed her immediately. Hey, not that way, called David. They then started arguing about the direction, while the thickening snowflakes blotted out all but themselves. In the end, they decided it was as hopeless to attempt to return as to go forward. They skirted the ditch, blundered through an area of trees, crossed another field, descended into another valley, and walked into another ditch. 3 breathless figures scrambled out on the farther side unaided. The fourth, Jessie, had to be lugged out. I say, are you hurt? Asked David anxiously. No, not a bit, answered Jessie, swaying. He caught her unconscious form just before it slid to the ground. But a situation which had been bad enough already became suddenly worse. Lydia hurried to his side. What's the matter? She exclaimed. The poor thing's conked out, she replied. I say, Lydia, now we've just got to find somewhere. Can you carry her? She's light. Then come along. It won't help standing here. Where's that other man? His voice sounded as she spoke. The clerk had vanished, but now a muffled shout came through the white curtain. Hi! A gate! Lifting the unconscious figure in his arms and telling his sister to take the suitcase she dropped, David hastened towards the voice. He searched in vain for the origin. Where have you got to? He called. Shout again. The next instant the clerk loomed before him, and they almost collided. Good Lord, gasped the clerk, staring at David's burden. Is she bad? Hope not. She just went off, answered David. Where's this gate? Just behind me. I think it leads somewhere. At another time, David would have commented on the gates generally did lead somewhere, but he did not, and he was not in the mood now for sarcasm or bantering about. Shove it open, he said. It won't open, returned the clerk. The snow's halfway to the top. Damn. Well, we'll have to climb it. Get over first, will you? And I'll pass her over to you. Think you can manage? Yes, of course. You hop over too, Lydia, and help him. They managed somehow. Beyond the gate, David took the chorus girl again. With the snow almost up to his knees, the snow was rising like a tide, and every yard seemed difficult, and more difficult than the last. If you ask me, murmured Lydia, dragging a sopping leg out of a small white pit, I think the unconscious lady is having the best of it. She won't when she comes to it, answered David, if she comes to. All correct to instruct me, smiled Lydia. Did she fall down? Inquired the clerk. We all fell down, David reminded him, but she seems to have fallen the hardest. Round a bend, the lane was full of bends. An incident occurred that brought both alarm and hope. A mass of snow nearly enveloped them. It was like a miniature avalanche, and it came sweeping down from nowhere. Warned by the preliminary swishing sound, David and Lydia managed to evade it, but the clerk was less lucky. For a second he disappeared, and then emerged from an untidy white mound, spluttering. Where did that come from? Cried David. A roof, I should think, answered Lydia. Let's hope so, replied David devoutly. Have a look around. You too, will you? I'm afraid the pack horse isn't quite so mobile, but pres garde. He stood still while they searched, holding his burden close to him to give it warmth. In a few moments they reported a barn. Splendid, exclaimed David. That's first-class news. Barns don't grow all by themselves. We'll strike a house now before we know it. A house! A house, repeated Lydia, with almost delirious ecstasy. I'd forgotten there were such things. A house with a fire and a bath. Oh, a bath. Sounds good, chattered the clerk. With renewed hope, they resumed their difficult way. They twisted round another bend. On either side of them, great white trees rose, and the foliage increased. Once they walked into the foliage, then the lane dipped. This was unwelcome, for it appeared to increase the depth of the snow and to augment the sense that they were enclosed in it. With their retreat cut off, they were advancing into a white prison. The atmosphere became momentarily stifling. Then, suddenly, the clerk gave a shout. What? Where? Cried David. Here! The house! Gulped the clerk. Almost blinded by the whirling snowflakes, he had lowered his head, and when the building loomed abruptly in his path, he only just saved himself from colliding with the front door. Okay, my friends, I think that's all I'm up to tonight. I don't want to stretch this voice any further, as I would like to continue reading tomorrow for you. So for tonight, I will say good night. This has been Indiana Homes. Thank you for joining me. Love to you all, and see you again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.